Welcome to Discover Indie Film. I'm your host, Jeff Howard, and I've got filmmaker Ashley Cahill with me. Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Jeff.
All right, so Ashley and I'm in Los Angeles. You're in London right now, yeah?
That's correct.
Funny, I got the email from you saying, of all the luck, you're back home the week the Queen dies.
That's right. That's true. I have a habit of being in the right place at the right time.
Madness.
For world events. So that's good. I'm glad I'm here because it would have sucked to have been in LA and watched it all on television. And I live very close to Buckingham Palace and Westminster Abbey, so it wouldn't be, it'll be pretty easy to, if I feel like going down there to watch it live, or, I could go to Hyde Park Corner pretty easily. It's about a 6-minute walk.
For sure. I know the area. I used to spend a lot of time in London, near there.
Oh, okay, good.
I forget which hotel my ex-wife used to prefer, but yes, we would be always within walking distance of Buckingham Palace. So
yeah, no, exactly.
Wonderful part of London. Well, obviously, for those who couldn't figure it out, it means we're on Zoom, which means if you're listening to this and you're pissed off at the audio quality, you cannot blame neither myself nor Ashley. You blame the Zoom Corporation for audio problems. And hey, in this introduction, first I'm going to say Ashley and I met at the Sherman Oaks Film Festival in 2019. That's a festival I program. And his film, First Person, a film about love, just going to rattle them off for you, took home the Grand Jury Prize for Best Feature Film, got you the Grand Jury Prize for Best Director of a Feature Film, got your lead actress, Best Actress in a Lead Role for Evelyn Kane. And back then we had a sponsor who specifically wanted to give an award for production design. And your film took home Best Production Design for Sophie Tibet. I hope it's not Tibet. It might be a silent T.
I think it's Tibet, yeah.
Tibet. So,
to be honest, I've never actually asked her how to pronounce her last name, but yes.
Well, we have decided.
Sophie Tibet. Yeah.
And actually the film looks fantastic. It's funny, I always think sometimes Sophie did a wonderful job on that film, but I also think sometimes jury members that cinematography fooled them into thinking production. But anyway, the film looks fantastic.
I think it's funny. The reason I'm in England is because I was at the wedding of the DP. His wedding was in Sicily, so that's why I'm here now. So I'm feeling a little bit like I shouldn't give all the credit to Sophie. He did a very good job, but I think the look of the film, if I'm going to be really honest, is more in her department on that film, because we were so cheap that he couldn't really do that much with the camera package that he had, and she did a hell of a lot with her tiny budget. Her and her assistant and the set dresser, Julia Roth, they are actually writing partners, and Sophie's really a director. She only does production design for me. She's trying to get a movie made right now, which I'm going to give her a little shout out, is called Stone Cold Fox. I've got the script right in front of me, and I'm meant to be reading it.
I love the title.
Yeah, Stone Cold Fox. And she's very talented. She did like a, what do you call them? Like a sizzle, not a sizzle reel, like a
teaser.
Teaser, yes. She did like a scene, and it looked great. I saw it. It was very, very good. And we were going to work again on a movie called Cold Million, but we'll get to that in a little bit. And then that fell through. And the next film that I'm likely to make is going to be in the woods in like Oklahoma or somewhere. I'd like to use them, but I'm not necessarily sure that they're right for it. Or I also don't know if we have the budget to fly them out to Oklahoma and so on and so forth. But yes, she's possibly a genius, and she's great. So she's well deserved the award you gave her.
Wonderful. Well, and it's an excellent film. I think you and I remember you came over to the house with a hard drive before the film, so we could have a really nice high quality copy of the film. So I got to chat with you then. Then we had a nice Q&A. I'll at some point, I guess I'm going to blow it now and say you had we had a conversation. We had a tech conversation at the closing night mixer that made, and that was in November of 2019. And for people who can't do math, basically 4 months before COVID slammed us all shut. But you and I had a long tech convo, and it turned into a new strategy at the theater, which vastly improved our let's just say, when you and I talked, the theater doesn't really have a problem. It's just, we talked and we came up with a way to make screenings better there. I'll just say that. And I'm always going to credit you with that, man.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. It was nothing. It just seemed...
It was just two people talking about film. And you said, maybe if you import it all and then do a single export instead of giving the theater different files. And I was like, I got to try that.
Well, that's years of being a low budget film producer. You come up with the quickest, easiest solution sometimes.
For sure.
But that was good. I had a good time at that film festival. And then I think the reason I brought you the hard drive is probably because I'd already been at a film festival before that, and the DCP didn't work. And then we had to use a Blu-ray, and then I just thought, you know what, it'd be easier if you just have a good, high-quality output from a hard drive.
Yeah, and I think it was like a ProRes file, which is pretty huge for those. Now we're going deep in the weeds, but yeah, when you try to share a ProRes file over Dropbox or WeTransfer, there can be errors. So
I think I also didn't want it to be online.
Right. Well, hey, before we are diving into the weeds of the first person era, but I promise you, I was going to go way back with you. You're obviously, I consider you a super talented filmmaker, writer, and director. And obviously, as you are sharing in the world of indie film, you may credit a producer, but you have a producer's brain as well, because you have no choice when you're doing.
You have no choice if you're making a film so low budget.
Yeah, and your film does not look low budget in any way. I mean, I think it successfully would fool anyone into thinking you had a good amount of money to play with.
Thank you. No, I didn't.
And I say that as someone who sees like 1,800 films a year that get submitted. So
right.
You know, the people who can do a beautiful cinematic look with the same equipment that other people make it look like a cheap VHS. Like I appreciate a film like yours that just looks great to the eye.
Thank you. Well, again, credit to Ryan Jackson Healy, who was my DP, and credit to Sophie Tabet and Julia Roth, who were
And I'll give a shout out to whomever your location scout was. Maybe that was you?
That was basically me.
Because the locations in the film added so much, I think.
Well, it was...
At least I
found the main house because it belonged to a friend of mine. And then I found... I'm trying to think of the locations. I found the pool house. Obviously, that also belonged to a friend of mine. And a couple of restaurants. I think the vast majority of the locations were me. There's a couple, like the doctor's office and a few other locations in there that my producer... I mean, I was one of the main producers of the film, but then I brought in a producer to deal with the boring day-to-day stuff and things like that. The contracts, the SAG agreements, the fucking permitting. Her name is Brighton, and she dealt with all of that, and she found me a couple of key locations. I mean, right now I'm thinking of only one that she found me, but we used it for two different things. You know, it was one location, but two sets, let's say. But I'm sure she found me a couple of other ones. But on that film, most of the locations were within 5 minutes drive of my house. So, she found me the Malibu location as well, which is where she lives. But most of the locations were close to my house. Much more so on my first feature film, which was filmed in New York. I found almost none of those locations. And that film was like a mockumentary, and it's all location. We had no production designer, nothing. We found locations. If they had great posters and great couches, we used them. And those were pretty much all found by my producer, whose name is Michael Rucker. And he does reality television now and things like that for Netflix. He's quite successful now.
Well, I want to jump back to your youth, but before I jump back to your youth, I'll just add one more piece of praise, which is it is a skill. It is a skill to look at a space and know it'll look good on film. Because I also see a good number of indies where the camera, everything is done well, but they chose a lousy place to shoot. Someone didn't realize that this wasn't going to translate on screen because it's different. Like something that looks great to the eye doesn't necessarily look great on camera.
True, including people.
Isn't that? I mean, yeah, the old fashioned Hollywood camera test is actually the only way to really know. I know not to gender neutral. I have seen incredibly attractive people in person who don't look wonderful on film.
Yeah, they're just not as photogenic as other people. They're not as interesting. The camera, I really do believe the camera either loves you or doesn't love you. It might like you. It might be a little indifferent to you. But, I do believe in the old it factor and, that person's a star and that person isn't a star. And that person might look good on film. Doesn't necessarily mean they're a star. It could be a number of things. And talent is a very small part of all of that, I think.
Yeah, personality too. Some people, the charisma jumps through the screen more so than in real life. And some people, they're charismatic in real life, and then you put a camera on them and they go flat.
Yeah. I don't know. What was I watching recently? I mean, he's obviously a very good actor, so it's not necessarily the best of examples. But I was watching Bonnie and Clyde recently, and I was interested in how good Gene Hackman is in that movie. And I thought, Gene Hackman, he is a supporting actor. He can play supporting because obviously he's supporting in Unforgiven. He's supporting in a lot of movies, but he's never really a supporting actor. When he's in the scene, he's very much taking over the scene. And it's not just his acting ability. He has a certain presence on film. And I think that's true of all the great stars. I think they walk in the room and your eye just watches them. You're not watching everyone else in the frame. When Fred Astaire's on camera when he was younger, before he's dancing, your eye's already paying attention to him. You're not really paying attention to anyone else. He's got a certain star power about him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. We see that all the time whenever there's a high school hit with an ensemble cast and there's a bunch of teenagers and everyone can look at it and go, oh, wow, that kid's going somewhere. Like that kid is leaping off.
And then luck plays a huge part and they might not go anywhere.
Oh, but, then they have to have the right manager, a million other things have to go.
A million other things need to happen for them. But, it's easy in hindsight. And sometimes it's surprising. Sometimes you could see an actor and be like, gee, he's nothing. And then they went on to do great things later. But sometimes let's say Out of the Past, the noir, Kirk Douglas is the heavy in it. And he's not that big a role. And it's, clearly a Robert Mitchum movie. But Kirk Douglas is fucking great in that movie. And you come away going, yeah, I can see why Kirk Douglas went on to become Kirk Douglas. Like, even this early on, he's got a certain charisma and star attraction that another actor in the same role might not have had, even if he was a character actor of that era. It's Absolutely. Like, well, he would have remained a film noir character actor. He wouldn't have gone on to become Kirk Douglas.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I bet every Hollywood icon we can go back to their first, because especially the studio system was so great about farming up talent and screen testing people and giving them a small role here, seeing how they do. Yeah, it was there was a certain amount of nurture of talent, also abuse of talent, but there was nurturing of stardom.
We don't need to get into all that, but just the nurturing of or it's like anything else, like, craftsmanship and apprenticeships. It's like that happened all the time in the film studio era on crews, obviously, and on, you work your way up to being a director or whatever, which happens a lot less now because you come straight out of film school and you think that you're going to be Martin Scorsese. But in the old days, it happened much more in a kind of, you learn the business or the art or the craft, I should say, and then you work your way up and you become a director, and you get given a chance on a B picture and then you become an A picture or whatever. But it also, although it didn't happen as often with actors, it also, because it was one big studio system, it did happen with actors. And you can see it with like Humphrey Bogart, of all people. Humphrey Bogart in the 30s, in the late 30s, is playing second fiddle to James Cagney. So he's the bad guy in Angels with Dirty Faces, which is, I think, 38. And he's definitely the bad guy in the Roaring 20s, which is 1939. Well, then he's in Casablanca in, what is that, 42? It's only 3 years later. But he's the star. He's by far the main, he's not only the star, he's a romantic lead. But he's the guy who Cagney is killing, let alone like the Oklahoma kid. He's in that too. So it's interesting to see how he's the bad guy, and then they kind of switched and they decided to make him the hero. And, Maltese Falcon's 39. So he's already...
Yeah, he's doing a lead, yeah.
He's already doing the lead hero role, and I think John Huston did that for him. I'm not saying, obviously, John Huston made that movie. I think it was John Huston who saw him. I think Humphrey Bogart credits John Huston as the guy that broke him into putting him into that realm as a leading man, let's say, as opposed to, the second leading man or the third leading man or the bad guy, which is what he could easily have ended up being the rest of his life.
Yeah. No, I mean, we could probably talk about Bogart for a long time.
Yeah, Bogart's great. And, he's in one of my all-time favorite movies, which is the Treasure of Sierra Madre. And he's great in that movie.
Yeah, we should probably discuss that in the next one. So, because the podcast after this will go through your favorite film.
I mean, I don't know, you limited me to 3 movies. I'm not sure I can, so I might have to discuss them all in this one and then rediscuss them in that one.
Fair enough. I don't mind at all. No rules. But I was I want to jump back. So when did your interest, obviously you're also a huge cinephile because you're already talking of you're naming films, brilliant films from the past. When did you get your passion for cinema?
So my parents are film buffs. When I say film buffs, I mean compared to average people, or maybe even beyond average people. But I mean, they're not. Nowadays, film buffs seems to have taken on this connotation of like Quentin Tarantino and, Martin Scorsese level of film buffdom, Edgar Wright level. And they are not that. I'm not that. And they definitely aren't that. But they were definitely film buffs compared to the normal person. When they had U-matic, which predates VHS, they had movies on U-matic, and then they got films on VHS, which they would record off television. But, when I was a child, we had like 450 VHS movies, everything from, you name it, they had it. So, Gaslight, Cabaret, Gilda, whatever. And I would grow up watching those movies. Mainly my mother's the film buff. I think my father just went along with it. Because her brothers, my uncles, are all film buffs too. And then my brother, who's 15 years older than me, wanted to become a film director and would make shorts and stuff on 16 mil or 8 millimeter here. Actually here in the house I'm in, because my parents owned this place before I was born. And then I got into films because I was around movies all the time. Now, like most people who grow up liking films because they just grow up liking films and they want to somehow be involved in films, I wanted to be an actor because I think you don't really think about directors when you're 5, or 7, And then eventually, I started writing things at boarding school just to be in them, and they were terrible. And then my dad had a camcorder. My father worked in advertising, so he had some access to some equipment and things like that. He got my brother some directing jobs and stuff in commercials, and so he had a camcorder, and so then I started to make stupid films when I was 8 or 9. I sound like Steven Spielberg talking this way. It's the same story that, certain filmmakers make. I obviously am not Steven Spielberg, but it's that kind of like, oh yeah, and then I make these little stupid films, and it would be like either toys moving. I would do stop motion, which is you can do kind of with a camcorder. Obviously, it's much easier to do it with a film camera where you can actually do it frame by frame. You start, stop, and it was a bit janky. But the problem with camcorders, at least in those days, was you couldn't really edit them. They were very inaccurate. So I learned to edit in camera, which I think is it served me on the last film. It didn't really serve me on my first film, but my last film was so low budget that to do all the setups of a certain scene, let's say, in a certain location, in the amount of time that we had, we wouldn't film it all the way through. Like most movies, as you know, but whoever's listening who might not know, you shoot the whole scene from, let's say, the master, then you shoot it all from a certain angle, and then if you have a camera move, you shoot it from that. You shoot the whole scene through the whole way if you can, and then you edit it later. Which is not, of course, how John Ford and Hitchcock made it, but that we can talk about that separately. But we didn't have time to do it, so we were running out of time, so I remember being like, well, it's a skill I learned as a child, but I haven't had to do it since a child, so I wasn't sure it would actually work. But it's where you cut it in your head, in camera, and you kind of go, well, I'm not going to need to cut in until this moment of the scene, so we won't even bother the first half of the scene in close-up. We'll cut right in the second half, or we'll cut in on this line on the script. And, then we get into the editing room and hope that I don't regret that I didn't bother shooting the close-up for the first half of the scene, but it seemed to work the 2 times I had to do it. But anyway, back to me as a kid. So I got into that. I'd shoot things on camcorder and this, that, the other. And then, fast forward, this is me as a 10-year-old. Fast forward to me as a 18-year-old. I applied to USC Film School, and I actually wanted to go to NYU, but I missed the deadline on trying to get into NYU because I was at school here and I didn't know what the deadlines were. They didn't tell me, and I hadn't taken SATs and all kinds of things. So I ended up going to USC, which was a mildly disappointing experience. But I got to say, I think NYU might have been too, except that I might have been around somewhat interesting people. But I took a couple of classes at NYU because I knew one of the teachers there. Antonio Monda is his name. And when I visited, he was friends with my family. And I visited, and I went to NYU, visited New York at 16. And I went to NYU for a day. And I couldn't believe how ignorant the students were. Now, that said, I might have been being a bit of a snob, and I might still be. So the flip side of that coin is they're at college to learn about film. So they're learning about film. Good for them. But when I was sitting there as a 16-year-old, and he's showing these clips from these movies, and he's like, who here can name them? I remember specifically he brought up, talking about scorpions being killed by ants and freeze frames at the beginning, and no one knew that he was talking about the Wild Bunch. And I remember being like, how did they not know they're talking about the Wild Bunch? And this is doubly annoying because the Wild Bunch had just been re-released that year. So they hadn't even gone to see it in the cinema. Or, he talked about the breakfast scene in Citizen Kane and people hadn't seen it. And I just thought, gee, these people are at college for film and they haven't seen Citizen Kane. Just seemed a little disappointing. Anyway, then I went to USC, and I'd say it was pretty disappointing. I don't think I really learned anything. I mean, I guess I learned the term, in fact, I didn't even learn the term. A friend of mine always brings it up, and I never remember the term. What was the term? Collision montage. I guess I learned the term collision montage at USC. But like so many of these critical studies things that have terms, it's like saying past participle or in English. I don't really know what that means. I couldn't explain what that is as a verb. But, either you can know how to write prose or you don't. And I don't think, it's like the Beatles. They didn't know that the chord structures they were doing was a reference to this. They just knew it sounded good to them. And I think that's the same. I don't think Tarantino certainly now does know those terms because he's interested in film criticism. He's read all those books of film criticism, and he does film criticism himself. So he might not be the best of examples, but when he was making Reservoir Dogs, he might not have known what a collision montage is, or stupid terms like that. He just knows that this edits together well, and that I should cut to this, and it works because I've seen 2 million movies and I know how it works. I don't need to know what the actual term is or what the rules are. The 180-degree rule, for example, is a stupid rule that might have made sense back in the day, but doesn't really make sense today because it doesn't. Because you film, the music video and everything else has changed the whole language of film.
So, it has, and in a lot of ways, I always, as a viewer now, love watching people break the rule. Like the 180 rule, when it's broken artfully, is it always jumps out.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Rules are meant to be broken and all that. The problem is that now I'm going to talk out the side of my mouth because I'm going to double back and go, but when there's absolutely no language or rules to film, you're left with a mess. So when you don't know, you're left with what's going on today, or with a lot of movies for a long time now, which is it all seems to be made by committee, and there's not that many people that seem to have an eye, and they don't need to be fucking auteurs. I have problems with the auteur theory to begin with, but they don't seem to have any kind of
vision.
Vision.
Yeah. There's a lack of vision, and it probably is from committees.
Yeah.
Bossing people who might have the skill to do it, but they're getting bossed. I agree with you, and I couldn't help but think of the Picasso example, right? Of people might look at Picasso's abstract stuff and think he was just slapping paint around, but he could do beautiful, formal painting as well. He could do impression. He could do incredible figure drawing. It's just then he would choose to make a completely fucked up face, but he knew all the rules of form and perspective and ratios.
I don't. Yes, and I agree with that. I think that counts a lot more when it comes to painting than other things. But I think I don't even mind that. I don't mind. I don't care if Basquiat couldn't paint like Rembrandt. I know Picasso could, and I think he's the genius of the 20th century when it comes to art. But I also think Basquiat's probably a genius, and I don't think he could paint like Rembrandt ever. I don't think he could ever paint as well as Picasso could. However, I think what he was doing is very interesting and is very important. My problem is more that But what Basquiat isn't is not interesting. And my problem is more that if we shoot everything the same way and we shoot it from every fucking angle and then we get someone to edit it and then it's all computer graphics anyway, it's not interesting. I don't care that whether you know the rules or don't know the rules. I don't think Orson Welles necessarily knew the rules when he was breaking them all. But he has a vision and he's interesting, and it's very difficult to copy Orson Welles. In fact, it's almost impossible to copy him because he's so unique in his vision. In fact, the movies that you can copy him on are the least Orson Welles-y movies, ironically, which are the films he's most famous for, which I think are Citizen Kane and possibly The Magnificent Ambersons. That's starting to become already a little bit more Orson Welles-y. Not taking away from him, I think his imprint on Citizen Kane is pretty much 70% him. I subscribe to it's 70% him, 30% Mankiewicz. I'm not one of those. It's all Mankiewicz and in comes fucking Orson Welles. Yeah, maybe the script, but you didn't come up with the entire movie that he did. You didn't bring in Bernard Herrmann and Toland and everything else he did. However, the films he was doing when he's cheaper and no longer has carte blanche, which now seem to be the more Wellesy, the handheld, the crazy thing, the opening of Othello and those kinds of things, the Chimes at Midnight. I think those are maybe more interesting, and they're certainly more like, oh, we're watching Orson Welles immediately. Like immediately you're watching him. And they're really hard to copy. Like there is no one that seems like him. And that's what I mean. It's like there doesn't seem to be there. Of course, there are people who do that now. I don't mean Orson Welles. I mean people have visions. But the vast majority of cinema today has to answer something else. So it's about a larger IP, or it's got a lot of graphics and a lot of special effects involved. So there's only so much you can do because you're at the mercy of the people doing the graphic, the special effects work. And Brian De Palma talks about this in the De Palma documentary. He's like, so if you are doing an action scene and it's all going to be done in a green screen and it's all them, it ends up becoming formulaic because it ends up being templates, because you end up just using these guys. They don't have a vision. So the camera's always doing the same move or a crane shot or whatever. And it becomes boring. And yes, he's an old white man talking, and I am now to a degree, but I think there's some truth to that.
And I completely agree with the core concept, which is the best films, the best cinema is interesting. Every shot is interesting. In fact, I'm currently deep in the reads watching submissions to Sherman Oaks Film Festival, and I saw a bunch of boring things. There was nothing interesting on screen. And then a film out of Russia about a prostitute and her daughter and a mentally challenged man walking through to the border of the Russian Federation and Kazakhstan, and every shot was interesting. Every face was interesting. It was a completely slow burn, slow paced, 25-minute film, and I couldn't take my eyes off it for all 25 minutes, and it felt like 9 minutes. And then there's stuff I'll just throw because you shared a little bit of shade towards your USC experience, and then like there will be a short film from a USC student, not all of them, but where you can tell the kid blew $100,000 on a 15-minute film. And it might look super professional, but there's not one interesting thing to see, and the story's not interesting.
Right.
And you literally cannot get through it.
And yet one of the best shorts I ever saw was at USC, which is ironic. It was by John Chu, who has gone on to do Crazy Rich Asians, and he's doing the new he did In the Heights, and he's doing the new the one about Wicked. I think he's doing the new Wicked, or maybe, I think he's doing Wicked. It's a 2-part film. And he was, I think, the year below me at USC, and I went and saw this bunch of shorts, and he did this fantastic short film about, it was intercutting tap dancing with I think he was black. I think a black kid going to a 7-Eleven to get something. Either way, he was a person of color. He may have been Asian. It was 25 years ago that I watched this, or 20-something years ago that I saw this. But either way, he was doing this. And it was intercutting, and the tap dancing was getting more and more frantic because it was the soundtrack. And the guy, the 7-Eleven counter guy was obviously judging him and thought he was going to rob him. And I don't really remember how it ended, but I remember thinking it was so good that I actually sought him out to compliment him on the film. And I remember that film to this day. And his next film, I don't think he'll ever listen to this, and I actually know him, but I don't think he'll care that I say this. His next film was very ambitious and much bigger. His thesis film, which I also saw, but it wasn't nearly as good. It was impressive in I'm impressed you managed to get this done kind of way. Like, he had lots of dancers and a huge, which is why it's not surprising he went into musicals and, Step Up and things like that. But he had all these he had these dances, they do backflips across the lawn and things like that. And I saw it, and I was impressed more at the achievement that a student, especially because I was coming from, I never would have had the patience to mount such a production. But I barely remember it, and I definitely saw it because I can remember moments of it. But it was like, no, your first film was like almost a masterpiece. this other film, it shows that you can be a good producer and you're ambitious. But he certainly had an eye. And he's the only student, I think, that I saw of all the shorts I saw at USC, including mine, actually, because I was basically just copying Martin Scorsese in that era, or, the French New Wave. Like every other 17, 18-year-old, I discovered the French New Wave and decided to keep copying Francois Truffaut. But outside of that, I think, I would say he easily made the best short that I'd ever seen at USC. Not counting, they would show us like Robert Zemeckis' short film, which was also brilliant. It was about a bouncing ping pong ball. And that was brilliant too. But I lost my train of thought there. But
for sure. Well, I mean, I think I threw a little shade at USC just about focusing on that cinema is actually, it's a mixture of the technicals of cinematography and production, but it's also storytelling. And if both of those elements are interesting, right, function and form, then you've really got something special. And it sounds like that first short by Chu was actually hitting on all levels. And it sounds like the bigger one was he focused on the technical side and maybe left out the storytelling. Yes, and when the story doesn't grab you, it's less memorable.
The one was now I might not be doing it justice at all because I honestly don't really remember. I'm sure it did have something personal to it. I feel like it did have like an Asian, twist on it, but I honestly can't remember it. But yes, the second one, the bigger one, felt like it was more an exercise in filmmaking, an exercise in showing the dean or showing perspective, studios, what he's capable of, and it obviously worked. The first one was not that, but it stuck with me. I mean, to this day, I don't want to say it's the best thing he's ever done because it isn't. He's a very, very good filmmaker, but it might be the most personal thing he's ever done. How about that?
For sure. And
so John, if you ever hear this, if I don't see you while I'm in London, because he's filming in London, and we might try and grab a drink, but he's very, very busy. I think it's the best thing. Not the best thing. I think it's the most personal thing he's ever done. But we are. And I don't want to compare myself to him. We are completely different in every respect. He's an exceedingly successful and famous filmmaker, and I am not. So it would be very arrogant of me to compare us. But I've always wished, I should say, and it's, by the way, he has absolutely no reason to do this and no requirement to be this filmmaker. He wants to make studio pictures, and good for him. And he does them, and he does these huge musicals, and well done you. But based on that first film and maybe a little bit of the second one, I always hoped and wished he would do something much more personal and much more auteur-y. And he decided not to go that route. And it is what it is.
And life is short, but he's got time. He might do that. Hit middle age and start to go, you know what, I'll do one for me and three for them kind of thing.
Yeah, and or again, he might not have any interest in doing that, and that's fine too. You know what? Robert Zemeckis can be Robert Zemeckis. He doesn't need to be Martin Scorsese or Francis Ford Coppola. You know what I mean? Like, you could just be Robert Zemeckis and put your personal stuff in. I don't know what is personal about Forrest Gump or Contact, but you know what I mean? Like, you could just make those movies and entertain people and make good versions of them as opposed to fucking Michael Bay. And that's fine too. You don't need to be Bob Fosse to name a personal musical filmmaker. You can be Vincent Minnelli. But I think even Vincent Minnelli put quite a lot of personal in there. I don't know. You know what? I'm being unfair because for sure Crazy Rich Asians has personal in there and his own experiences in there. So I'm being unfair to John slightly. So I'll apologize to you on that one, John.
Well, but I think
sure
what
he'll
you
never hear this.
is it fair to say he probably won't hear this, but I think it's fair to say that we are also both saying he's an important filmmaker. He's actually he is doing excellent work, undeniably excellent work that is also reaching audiences, which I always think I love that you're mentioning Zemeckis, because I always see Zemeckis as almost a secretively auteur filmmaker, because I think a lot of his work I think he was one of the best at, within the studio system, being intensely creative and subtly special, while also getting through that committee at the studio that will try to beat the life out of anything original.
Well, that happened a lot less then than it happens now. And he had Spielberg backing him up. And Spielberg in the 80s might as well have been God. Like, if Spielberg says yes, then it's a yes, no matter what. And I think Spielberg gave him quite a lot of free reign. In fact, pretty much free reign. I don't think he treated him the way he treated Tobe Hooper on Poltergeist. However, Zemeckis, I think Back to the Future is one of the great scripts ever written, and succeeds as a movie too. I think it's one of my favorite films. I think it's a fantastic movie. I think it's a masterpiece. I think that Who Framed Roger Rabbit is also a fantastic movie. After that, I think Robert Zemeckis is really a shit filmmaker. And I'm just going to come out and say that. I think he is fucking awful. And I can't really understand how he made Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. I think Forrest Gump's a joke of a movie. In fact, I listed it as a potential one of my overrated films that you'll ask me about later. But I've settled on, I think, Eyes Wide Shut. But Forrest Gump's in here. I mean, it is such a bad movie. And I think Contact is crap. I think Castaway is crap. I think that What Lies Beneath is just a terrible Hitchcock ripoff. And I haven't even bothered watching some of the other ones he's done. But he's terrible. I really think Robert Zemeckis is awful. But I think he is an auteur. But you know what? Ed Wood is an auteur. Being an auteur doesn't mean you make good movies. You know, Ed Wood is definitely an auteur. He's as much an auteur as Orson Welles, which is why Tim Burton has that scene in the movie where they meet. Because they really are the polar opposites, right? I mean, they really are both struggling to get movies made, both never have any money, both but one is a genius and one makes pieces of shit films. And I think Zemeckis, although not as bad a filmmaker as Ed Wood, is a bad filmmaker. I hope he's never going to be in a position to try and fund my films, because I might have screwed myself up there. But
well, needless to say, it'd be a fun thing if they manage to. By the way, they're not going to find this podcast. This podcast is mainly listened to by fellow indie filmmakers and fans of indie stuff. Big shots don't have time for every podcast you've ever recorded. But if he does, I bet it'd just be a funny conversation. Hey, I enjoyed that shade you threw at me. So whatever, fair enough.
Yeah, maybe.
But let's jump back to you. So
I call Back to the Future a masterpiece.
So USC, you refer to yourself as a what was it? French New Wave was your focus.
French New Wave nut. With and obviously, like everyone else, I liked Martin Scorsese and I liked some Coppola and the usual stuff. But I was definitely much more in NYU. I was at USC, but my sensibilities were more with the NYU film students types than I would have been with the USC ones. Right? We had a saying at USC: if you want to make art films, go to NYU. If you want to make money, you go to USC. And that was actually a saying at USC. So that tells you the mentality of people at USC. Most of the people at USC's favorite films are Star Wars. And, George Lucas, he's funding the fucking school. It makes sense that people like it. Robert Zemeckis had the Robert Zemeckis Center for Digital Effects opened while I was at USC. I was there the last, I think my last year was its first year, and I edited on Avid. I remember learning to edit on Avid. But before that, I was the last year. Yeah, or John Chu's year might have been the last year. It might have been them. But us two, the 2 years were definitely the last years. I'm pretty sure if it wasn't me, if it wasn't my year, it was the next year, to use film, to actually cut on film. So we cut on Super 8, obviously, and then we cut 16 mil. I made a 16 mil short called The Note, which I haven't seen since USC. And because I never managed to telecine it onto VHS, whereas I did my Super 8s. So I've seen them a few times, but I haven't seen The Note since USC. And I used the same composer on that called Jacques Brautbar. I used the same him on that that I used on First Person. So we go way back. But I didn't use the same DP, although I met him at USC as well. But he was wanting to be a director back in those days. And he's a good DP. I'm not convinced he's a great director, but he's a very good DP. So he went to AFI, and I think he realized he's more in that realm. And so, but back at USC, he was a director. So I wouldn't have used him anyway.
So you come out of USC.
Yeah, I come out of USC.
What's your focus once you finish?
Nothing. Being very fucking lazy and hanging out with friends and girls and going to clubs. Basically, what happened is the last year at USC, I fell in with a really fun but very connected crowd. Connected meaning connected to LA. They all were from LA. Basically, 2 people I met at USC had come from LA, and most of the people I knew at USC were from the Midwest or the East Coast or Europe, and were there to make movies. These guys weren't even in the film program. I don't know even how I met them. I think I met one of them through the DP friend of mine, a girl, because she liked him. And then I met my composer. He was in a band at the time called Phantom Planet. And through them, we met, this other band that was completely unknown called Kara's Flowers, that then went on to become called Maroon, that then went on to become called Maroon 5. And so all these guys were all hanging out, and we're still all friends, but I got to know them all. I know exactly when I met most of them. It was November 2000. And I graduated May 2001. So we're talking about really the very end of my time. I was always like, LA sucks and I'm going to leave LA once I graduate. Then I met all these guys that all were from LA and got into all the fun clubs in Hollywood or whatever. And I'm a 22-year-old. And of course, and know all these really good looking girls. And suddenly I'm hanging out with them and LA's not so bad after all. And going to, pool parties in Malibu and stuff like that because their parents were rich, some of them. And it's like, great, suddenly LA doesn't seem so bad. It seems very Warren Beatty shampoo era. And I fell into that. And then I met some other people and I met some movie stars that I befriended. But I tried to get a film made here and there, but to be honest, I didn't really try very hard. And then I moved to New York for a year and I wrote a movie called Charm that I ended up making, that I ended up self-financing. And that was my first feature film. And that kind of put me more on the path of movies again. And the reason I made that movie, it wouldn't have been my idea. I'd actually written a film that I always tried to get made, and we almost got made recently with Lucy Hale and I can't remember the actor's name off the top of my head. Charlie Heaton from Stranger Things. And we almost got that movie made. And it's called The Life and Death of Adam Riley. And I wrote that in 2005 or something, really a long time ago, during my fun time. And it was all about, because I was in love with this girl and she was a junkie. And I wrote it based on her. And anyway, I wrote this whole script, and it's very kind of 8.5, and it's a bit pretentious, but I guess it's quite good. And I was trying to get that movie made, and I met this producer who was a friend of mine. I met him out. He was also going out, called John Craven, son of Wes Craven, and he introduced me to another guy called Cody Zwig, who worked for Wes Craven's company, and they were thinking of doing a remake of a film called Man Bites Dog, which is a French.
I saw that one, yeah.
Yeah, familiar with it, right?
Yeah.
French film that came out in 92, I think.
Yeah, very gritty, black and white.
Very gritty, black and white, very violent, with a really nasty rape scene in it and a really nasty death of a child in it. Very kind of, you throw it in the pile of like Henry Portrait of Serial Killer type, very kind of, except whereas that's documentary style, this actually is meant to be a documentary, Man Bites Dog, right? They've got a film crew and it's very funny, but very gritty and very dark. Belgian film. It's not a French film. It's Belgium, actually. And they're following these guys around. They follow a serial killer around, basically. He goes around killing people and stuff like that. And they want to do a remake. And then the remake, Wes Craven wanted to do it. And they hired me to write it. And I wrote it. And then it fell through. And they were like, well, you should just make the movie anyway. And so I did. Now, it's not really a film I would have done as my first film, to be honest. And I have quite a lot of problems with it, but mainly that it's mockumentary and that doesn't really show anything off as a film director. It shows off performances and editing, but as a film director, how much can you do with a mockumentary style? So there's that, and it's completely unoriginal, although I don't actually say it's based on it because it's different enough, and I'm just saying, well, it's a mockumentary about a serial killer. I mean, I guess you could sue me, but I don't think so. So I never gave them any credit. But actually, that is where it came from. And then they were like, well, you should just play the role yourself because at least you'll be on set all the time and you don't need to pay an actor. You can just film it whenever you want. And so I thought, well, all right. So then we made that film for like $35,000 or something. I mean, super cheap. And then it sold to France, of all places. And it got a theatrical release. It's on Amazon Prime if someone wants to see it. But actually, yeah, all right, see it on Amazon. I don't actually get any money from it. I don't know how it ended up on Amazon Prime. So you know what? If someone wants to see it, they should find it. They should write in, I guess, Charm Director's Cut or Random Acts of Violence Director's Cut. It got renamed. It's not called Charm. Sorry, it's called Random Acts of Violence. I don't like that title.
And there's two cuts floating out there?
There's the official cut, which is on Amazon Prime, which is the version that also got released theatrically in France and Germany, I think. And then, so technically I've had a theatrical release, which is pretty cool. But, and it's got some good reviews, some very good reviews, some not, it's got very bad, it's got some very bad reviews from like viewers, but actual critics, most of them give it pretty good reviews. And people who do it online and stuff. But it's called Random Acts of Violence, and the version I would suggest people watch is the version on Vimeo, the director's cut, and it's free, and I've just stuck it up, and I guess the company could sue me and tell me to take it down, but they haven't yet, so it's up there right now, and that's the version I would suggest. Now, I say director's cut. The original cut was the director's cut. I had Final Cut. I financed the fucking film. But very often, once I've done the cut, and I go back to it 2 years later, and I'm watching it, like most directors, but whereas most directors add to it, I actually take away. And the real reason I did that is there's these two actors in the original cut that are just appallingly bad. And for some reason, I didn't cut them out. And I've decided that they're my parents. So the characters that play my parents. And they're just awful. And I decided to cut that whole scene. And so that scene's about 7 minutes long or 6 minutes long and cutting it out. And then when I did that, I remember doing a screening before we'd even sold it. And this guy, his name was Alex Olch. And he was the boyfriend at the time of this girl called Jennifer Murray, who's in this film. She's not an actress, and she actually lives in London too. But she's in this film, and she's fantastic in it. And she's really great. And I cast her because she was so great. And I said, you just have to play yourself. And she did. She's a real flamboyant type. And she was dating this guy, Alex Olch, who kind of annoyed me. And he's very arrogant and stuff. But, we both are always like sword fighting when we're talking type relationship back then, whenever we'd meet. Also, it didn't help that I kind of had a crush on his girlfriend. But either way, he suggested that I move a scene that comes later in the film right to the opening because it's so shocking. And he's like, that's how you should open your film. And I was like, nah. And then a year later, I thought, yeah, actually, he's right. And that's how my director's cut version does open. So Alex Olch came up with that idea. So shout out to him wherever he is. He's in New York somewhere. I think he comes from a rich family. He's one of those, knows Lena Dunham types. Anyway, so I made that film. It came out. It did nothing. And you can see it on Vimeo. And then, I don't know, I spent another 6 years doing nothing, and then I made another film. I mean, I did write
When you
films
say doing
that I
nothing,
made,
just
but,
living, enjoying life, like
basically,
bohemian?
well, trying to get films made, but basically just fucking living and doing nothing. And, I did a couple of writing jobs that paid a little bit, and then I have some money that I inherited a while ago, so there's that. So one way or another,
so you don't have you don't need Starbucks to get by.
I don't need to wait tables to get by or pump gas. No, I don't need to do that. And then, although I did finally, get an actual job, but that's later. And then that's after inflation and everything started killing everyone. And a friend of mine wanted me to help run a magazine for her, basically become the managing editor. And that's what I do now. But of course, when it rains, it pours. Suddenly I have a deal that potentially with a well-known producer who I won't name, potentially I'm going to be making a film in March of next year. So suddenly, and I'm actually getting paid for this one. I didn't get paid for the last two because I basically self-finance them. So, but that's skipping ahead. So anyway, yes, I did a lot of fucking about. And, well, no, I had a couple of writing jobs. We almost got to write Expendables 2 or 3. And then I had meetings with my co-writer had meetings with Stallone and stuff, and then that ended up falling through. Literally, as the contracts came, that fell through. Stallone pulled out. There were a few other things. I'd get a windfall of money every so often, but on the whole, I certainly wasn't living off that windfall. And then I thought, you know what? I just want to make. Oh no! And then we were going to make Life and Death of Adam Riley, and that almost happened. And then we were going to make a film called Scottish Play, and we had some people attached for that, and that almost happened. And then they both fell through quite early. I mean, when I say fell through, I'll come to the ultimate fall through story in a second. When I say fell through, I mean the money never really came, and then the actors were attached, but we couldn't get the financing. It wasn't like it fell through as we were about to.
Right. It was in the early stages.
In the early stages, but it's all time wasting. And then those fell through. And then I thought, you know what? Fuck it. I'm going to make another film. But this time I'm going to make a film that shows my talent as a director. And that was first person. And then it got into your festival and another festival. And then it got into yet a couple more festivals where it also won awards. But then one of them I won for Best Female Director, which just shows you what a ridiculous state of affairs we're in now. I won Best Female Director, and then I told them I'm male, and they took the award away. And I wanted to be like, it's not my fault. I made a better film than any of the women made. But,
that is, I'm proud to say, whatever. I especially dividing directorships by gender.
Just seems absolutely
there's no justification. In fact, our festival, for a couple years, because I'm sort of insistent upon it, we did gender neutral acting awards, just best lead performance, leaving out gender. But then we got pressured, and it's you can give twice the awards if you do actor and actress. So I think we went back.
No, and I think actor and actress is one thing because you can see it. But I actually think that for every festival from Sundance down, you should not they should all be anonymous. I think films should be submitted with no credits, genuinely with no credits, so that there's no way they can even guess, not only at your gender, but at your race, at your country of citizenship, nothing. You are basing whether you like this movie or you don't like this movie solely on the film. And if you recognize that it's got Denzel Washington in it, good for you. You've recognized that Denzel Washington's in it. And then obviously we're not going to pretend that you won't play, favorites. But short of that, I think it's outrageous that it's like, oh, are you female or male? And look, yes, I know, of course, men and white men have dominated in the film industry forever, and others should have their chance. But I do find it odd that, it's the same way that that it's unfair that people don't get the job back in the day. You wouldn't get the job if your name sounded African American, right?
Yeah, or like
And it was always
one of the great examples is auditioning when musicians audition for a symphony. When they didn't have a curtain up, men were always rated higher than women by the male
yeah,
jury.
and white
And then
people
they
would have
put a
been
curtain
hired.
up, and
Right.
suddenly women are 50% of violinists.
Exactly. And white people would have got the job over blacks and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
Even after integration and, for sure, of course. And I think that's fair. I think it's completely
Yeah.
fair to put the curtain up and the best violinist gets the fucking job because it's the best violinist. And I think that with film festivals, I'm not stupid enough to think to not realize that there's a financial aspect to filmmaking. And so once we get into studios and the making of movies and star power and genders and all that stuff, that's a whole different discussion that we can get into if you want to or not. But, equal pay and stuff, that's a whole nother, we're getting into another realm. But on the certainly on the indie film festival circuit, maybe not Cannes, but, on TIFF, down, I think films should not have credits when they are submitted. You obviously add the credits for the actual screenings, but not for the submission. They're watching the movie. It starts with no credits. It ends with no credits, and they have no fucking idea who was involved, how many Amish people were on the crew. They don't know, right? This is the movie. And the idea that the Oscars cannot give an Oscar to The Godfather because it didn't have 30% women or people of color on the crew. I think it's important to open. I do think on the one hand it's important to have more opportunities, but at the same time, The Godfather is The Godfather, and it doesn't. The cast certainly does not require women in it.
Yeah, well, I can say and I can't say this for everyone on the jury, I'm not sure, but for the two festivals I'm involved in, I make a point of not looking at any information about the film before I watch it. I just want to watch it raw. I don't want to see where it's from, who made it. I don't want to know anything about it besides the film itself. And then if I really like it, I start going, okay, I hope you're an LA local. I hope you're, I start getting hopeful, but I just want to see the film unbiased. And funny thing, you mentioned the opening credits and closing credits thing is that, yeah, I do really enjoy the aesthetic now of not even having opening credits, maybe showing a title. But I honestly think when I get an indie film that has like the first 3 minutes, just like a series of names, I'm like, who do you think you are? Like just, you don't have to start with a long title sequence if you're making an indie film where no one's heard of anyone in the film. Like, just get to storytelling.
I agree.
Yeah.
Like, if it's good enough for Star Wars, it's good enough for everyone.
Sure. All right. So you reached a point and first person was the script and film that you said, I'm doing this one completely for myself to make the film I want to make.
And also to showcase.
And to showcase your skills, yeah.
To showcase me as a filmmaker, yeah. And then from that, we got this film called Cold Million in January or February, I think January of 2020. And we were going to make that. And then, of course, that was going to be made by a subsidiary company owned by Warner's. I won't name the company. And then they were a fucking pain in the ass too, it turned out. But that's later. And then Warner's, the subsidiary of a subsidiary of Warner's. So it was a subsidiary of Turner Classic, of Turner, which is a subsidiary of Warner's. And then they were going to make the film. And they were paying only in that they were giving them notes and stupid things over like a $400,000 movie, which is just like, really? But they were at least backing the film, and they were good about that part of it. And then the pandemic happened. They stayed with it, and it was all okay. And then we cast. I'm deciding whether or not to throw him under the bus or not. I guess I won't.
Let's fair enough. We don't have to, because things happen.
But let's just say we cast a name actor who's not who. Let's put it this way: if I bring him up to anyone who's not super film buffy, they go, "Who's that?" So he's not particularly famous. However, if they then look him up, they recognize him because he's been in a few films and a couple of shows. But he is not a big actor.
Right, but he's a face on a poster that some people would see going through a streaming service, see his face, and go, "Oh, I know that guy."
Yes, he's in one of my favorite movies as a small role. Right, so he's in that kind of a realm, you know. In the 90s, if this was the 90s, he wouldn't be quite as big as Skeet Ulrich, but he's, you know, but it's that kind of, you know.
By the way, my laughter, I'm going to enjoy throwing shade. I always saw Skeet Ulrich as, I think his name should be not Johnny Depp.
Yeah, he's such a one-note actor. He's an absolutely nothing actor.
And I think his whole career is based upon people could see him in a poster and go, "Wait, is that Johnny Depp?"
Yeah,
Wait,
no,
it's not.
I think, yeah, there's so many of those guys. So this guy's not that. He's a much better actor than that. But, you know, he's had some issues in his life and it hasn't quite gone the way it should have done. Or maybe it has gone the way it should have done because he's had so many issues in his life of substance abuse and other problems. And he's an eccentric and he's a bit difficult. But he was a big supporter of the film. And, you know, I'll tell you once we switch off who he was. But he was a big supporter of the film, and, you know, and we got a signed contract with him, and it was all great, and it was moving ahead. And then, you know, after COVID, I think he got a couple of jobs, and he thought, or his agents thought, or maybe his agents were telling him bad news, or maybe his producing partner, who I don't think liked my producer, was a bit of an Iago. Either way, somewhere along the line, he started to want more money, and they started to make these ridiculous demands, even though we actually had a signed contract with him. They started making these ridiculous demands of this and the other, and, you know, a certain amount of backhand and this. And anyway, my producer actually delivered on it all eventually. Like, you know, I think in hindsight, they may have been making demands they didn't think we could deliver. But we did deliver. Now, this is where my producer fucked up. My producer said it was all fine and dandy and to start pre-production. So we did, and we spent money that we had raised. Turns out it wasn't. And he does have a bit of a habit of jumping the gun, my producer, which is very fucking annoying. And I've learned from then to take some of the things he says with a large pinch of salt. But, so we were in pre-production. And we were moving ahead. And I had a meeting with the actor who was a big fan of mine and is still a big fan of mine. And I don't mind him, but I do think he did a shit maneuver here. So I met with him and we read through the whole script one-on-one. We're talking about in pre-production about, we've had to push it, but we're talking about like 3 weeks out from filming. Sophie's involved, Julia's involved, my DP is involved, Ryan Jackson Healy, my composer's involved, but he's not writing anything yet. We've got other people, we've cast the whole thing, we've got a casting director. I mean, we're fully in. We've got locations, we found locations. We're about 3 weeks out. Well, we were 10 days out, we had to push the damn thing. So we were 10 days from filming, but it was so complicated and this thing, and then he was starting to drop out and we had to think, and it was fucking Thanksgiving was coming out and we pushed it to after the holidays. So after January 1st. And then I have a meeting with him in December. And we read through the whole script and he's super enthusiastic. It's a great script, Ash. Thank you. And we're going to do it. And he's like, you know, I have a space, I'm not working in January. And I was like, well, why don't we just do it then? Because we were still hoping to maybe try and do it before and after Christmas, which would have been a disaster. So that's when we pushed it to January. And I'm like, great, great, great. And then on January 1st, he pulled out completely. And we thought about suing him. And I told, well, my producer was going to sue him. And I told him it was a big fucking waste of our time because we were never going to get any money out of him or out of anyone. Or worst case scenario, they go, okay, fine, we won't be in breach of contract. We will make the film, but we have to do it after this film and that film. And then they never make the film. And every time we come close to it, they can keep us on the hook forever. So, welcome to Hollywood. And my producer's a little bit greener than I am when it comes to that kind of stuff. I'm a lot more cynical and have seen how it works. So it is what it is. And we got fucked in the ass about 10 days before filming. And we got on the line for about $30,000 we had already spent, give or take. Because we'd already got the insurance and we'd already got things that we can't return. My production team returned a bunch of stuff and they weren't charged for it. And, but we had paid for insurance. We'd paid for casting, obviously our casting director. We'd paid for, I believe, a permit. We bought some things that we can't return, some basic stuff and some other things. I don't know. No, maybe we didn't spend 30,000. Maybe I think it was closer to 22,000. But either way, we spent some money. I dropped my pen over here. And it's a pain in the ass. But now that script has been, I'm in negotiations as we speak. I got sent the contract. It wasn't up to my liking. Just because it had no real guarantees in it, not the money. They're offering me $10 for it. They're just optioning it. But a sales company wants to finance it and go out to actors with hard offers, $1 million offers type of thing. What this version, the version with this actor in, was a $600,000 version, all in, with a lot of deferred salaries on like post-production stuff. The version that we're going to make now is a $4 to $6 million version. So with, about 2 million in offers. So, but they don't want our LLC to have it anymore. So we have to dissolve that and give it to them. But, it's obviously the option's a $10 option. I don't care about that. They'll pay me if the movie gets made. What I do care is that I'm guaranteed to make it. And it's all a bit in good faith and I don't have any faith. So it's like, no, you don't get to make this film without me, short of, Martin Scorsese wants to make it. And even then, I'm not going to let that be in the contract. I'm willing to have that negotiation. They'll have to buy me out for $200,000 or something. Short of that, I'm the fucking director. And I want that in writing. But I have a good lawyer and he's doing that. But when it rains, it pours. I have another movie, which I wrote a long time ago, which I won't describe the plot of here because I don't want someone to copy it. And it's a kind of a horror action film where Cold Million is a kind of a Coen Brothers-y, Fargo meets, No Country for Old Men, kidnapping goes wrong type film. And it's very funny and comedic, and it's a thriller as well, and set in LA. This other film's a horror film, which I won't even give any kind of idea on what it's about. But it's an action-y, it's a bit more of an action-y film now than it was. It started as a horror, and it's probably, I budgeted it actually recently, and I came in probably a little optimistically at 1.5 million. And the producer, who's a well-known producer, was planning to do like a series of movies, like, I'm going to do like 4 movies for $500,000 each, But then he really likes his script, and we've been working on it, and I've done 3 drafts of it, and now he's like, well, try and budget it in. And I think he had a bit of a shock at 1.5, but I think he's like, you know what? Yeah. Okay, let's make this version of it. Let's not try and cut it down to a $500,000 version. And we're planning to make that, knock on wood, in March. We're looking into rebates. There's certain states that give you a 30% rebate, and then if you use Native Americans on your crew, you get another rebate. And there's a lot of ways to try and make the 1.5 million not actually be 1.5 million.
And let me ask, I'm going to throw a question at you. So these things, is it, for you, is first person, the quality of first person helping you with these, or is it just the strength of the scripts?
Cold Million's just the strength of the script. This other film that doesn't have a title right now it's tentatively called Redemption or Retribution or the Redemption. We're changing the title. It's a crap title. Anyway, but that won't give any idea of what the plot is. That movie, I didn't have a script really. I had half a script because originally the film went in a completely different way. And when someone I knew who worked at the company said, "We're looking for some horrors. What have you got?" And I pitched like 10 ideas off the top of my head. I also pitched that one, but I knew that the budget they were looking for. This was a much bigger movie, and I changed a huge major plot element, and I made it up. And they were like, "Oh yeah, we quite like that one." And I was like, "Oh, well then I've only got like 25 pages because then it goes in a complete." So I sent them the first 25 pages, and they loved it. So then they were like, "Well, we need to get this into this state if we're going to try and get a rebate, by Friday." This was Monday. "Can you write the rest of the script by Friday?" So I was like, normally I could, but I'm fucking managing editor of a magazine right now. So I actually have quite a strict day job. And they're like, "Well, try." And I did. So I wrote 100. No, it wasn't 100 pages. It came in at 80 something pages, which is all they wanted. And I did that, and they loved the first draft. And then they gave me a bunch of notes.
You squoze out 60 pages in under a week.
In 4 days.
4 days. My goodness.
They gave me notes on Tuesday and Wednesday. I told them to stop doing that because I'm like, I'm already writing the script. I can't take your fucking ideas that you've suddenly had without having even read it and change everything by Friday. So they did. Then they gave me a whole bunch of notes, not that many, but some. But this guy's got a lot of big movies behind him, so he somewhat knows what he's talking about. So then I took the notes and I didn't agree with a lot of them, and I did the second draft, and he hated it. And he went back to the first draft and he goes, "You're right. Your first draft's better. Welcome to Hollywood." And so then we discussed and we came to an, and I was like, I have an idea of what you want. Trust me on my notes. So some of the, there were a lot of like the bad guys need a motive type of discussions. And I was like, they don't need a fucking motive. Jaws doesn't have a motive, for example. He just eats. You start giving them reasons and motives, and you're taking away from the fucking heroes. I hate that stuff. Anyway, I did my version of third draft, and they laughed it, and that's the version we're going to do. That now I've started getting emails. He's the kind of producer that unless we were going right into it, he's got too much time thinking about it, and then there's always a way to improve it, and maybe there is. He's come up with a couple of ideas for the MacGuffin to make it a little bit more of a reason to it. So I'll probably do a fourth draft. But basically, the third draft's pretty much good. And that's the version we're submitting, and that's the version we're getting done, and that's the version we're shooting. But it's also a period piece, which doesn't help. And it's set in mountains and stuff. So, I'm not sure it's really my type. My lawyer's like, we got to guarantee that you're the director on that. And I will be, but I have to be honest, I'm okay with them buying me out on that one. Much
right.
More
You're not completely driven to direct it. You'll direct it.
I'll direct it. But when did first person come into it? Right.
Yeah.
So when I was writing that first script, when he read the first 30 pages before I gave him the full script, he liked it, but he was like, he'd also read all my pictures of other films, and he was like, "There's some kernels here, but maybe you're not a great writer. Maybe you're not a writer," because he hadn't read any of my actual full scripts yet. And he's like, "Have you got anything that I can see?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I showed him first person, and he hated it. He was like, he came out of it going, "You're clearly a very good director." So on that front alone, it served its purpose. He was like, "You're great. You're a very good director. You clearly know how to get very good performances." He's like, "Top to bottom, there isn't a bad performance in your film." And he's like, "And you have an eye. You great compositions, some interesting camera work, and it's cheap. However, I fucking hated this movie. It's the stupidest movie I've ever seen. You know, he hated the script. He hated the characters. He's like, you're obviously not a writer. Then he read my first draft of this film and he was like, oh, maybe you are a writer. And then he read the third draft and was like, okay. And now he wants me to write other things potentially that they've got that they hate the writers on. Speaking of which, let me just quickly make a note. I have to actually call my... I have to call his assist, not his, let's say his co-producer back, who is the person who brought me in originally, because they sent me a script and I wrote a lot of details on a text saying how bad I thought the script was, but we never set up a call.
Okay. Funny that that was his reaction to First Person, because just like it took him a second view or a second read to realize which draft of the script was best. In my mind, I can't help but wonder if he watched First Person again, if he'd actually changed his tune on it, because I think it's such a film with quality.
I do too, but his problem was that he didn't think it was logically driven, or he thought it was written by someone who doesn't have kids, which is true. It was. What's ironic is that he then brought up...
I see. Now I got to argue with you and I discussed this. I think I thought you nailed. He just doesn't know any honest people, because you nailed how a lot of women feel about motherhood in that script.
Yeah, I think
it's just an uncomfortable view of an unhappy mother.
His producing partner loves the movie. She'd seen it years ago when it came out, because I know her, and she is a woman and a mother. And she loved First Person. It's just not his cup of tea. But what's ironic is he brought up Scenes from a Marriage. He's like, you ever see Scenes from a Marriage? He's obviously talking about the original, not the HBO remake or whatever. And I was like, well, yeah. In fact, I was trying to do Bergman to a degree with this movie, but clearly I failed. You know, I said to him, and he's like, well, yeah. No one can do Bergman. That's why he's Bergman. But I found it ironic that he's a fan of Bergman and didn't like my movie. But, well, there you go. You know, to each their own.
But First Person is working as a calling card.
So it is working as a calling card. Yeah. It seems like a very long interview. I'm feeling, I hope your audience, who, if they are still listening to this, aren't completely bored shitless.
See, I was actually almost grinning to myself that you thought you wouldn't go very long, and here we are. We're still cranking along, having a good chat.
Cranking along, yeah. So yeah.
So you're actually.
But now we're up to date.
We're up to date, and in classic. And it's not just indie life; it's indie meets Hollywood. Yeah, you have several projects at different stages of production, as people say.
Yeah, but this one feels, knock on wood, more legit.
Yeah.
The 1.5 million. The Cold Million movie, I don't know how legit that is. I mean, they make, we'll see. But the Redemption film, I think I will be making that. Whether I'm making that in March, I don't know. But I would bet money I'll be making that next year. That seems more likely.
Right. And for that, you'll just do a sabbatical from the magazine and...
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for sure. Because I obviously can't do both.
No, making a film is
you
more
can't
than
make a film and run a magazine at the same time. They're both full-time jobs.
Yeah.
But no, I'll take a sabbatical because the person who owns and is the editor-in-chief of the magazine, really likes what I'm doing on it, and the copy editing and stuff like that. So I think she would try and survive 2 or 3 months without me, and then come back, and then I just slip back in. Maybe we get an assistant or someone in and stuff. I mean, we're still we're such a tiny publication, but I'll do a shout out for that. It's called leoedit.com. I mean, it's called Leo, although we're thinking of calling it Leo Edit since the fucking website's called Leo Edit, but it's leoedit.com, and it's kind of a GQ for men. It's a style magazine for men, but we have interviews with The Rock or Chris Evans, and we've done lots of other things. We got a piece about Rolexes or race cars, or It's a good little magazine, and it's an online, and it's only 2 years old. I've only been involved. I mean, I've written pieces for her before, but I've only been involved as an editor since June. But it's coming along. It's good,
And you enjoy it?
I do enjoy it for the most part. We're doing a lot of interviews, which I don't like. It's not that I don't like interviews. When they're interesting and we're doing an interview and I interview them, it can be very interesting. But we get a lot of clients submitted to us for potential interview, and we turn most of them down because they're not famous PR companies are just reaching out like, oh, this guy's a third from bottom cast member on a fucking TV show. Who gives a shit? But we also get a thing, and I told the editor-in-chief that I think we need to start turning down a lot more of them. But it's a bit touchy because we start turning down too many, even bigger ones. Well, we're a startup. We're trying to get PR people to come in. But at the same time, we're not an interview magazine. We're not interview or that. We're trying to be GQ or Goop even for men. So, we have the odd interview, but we also need style, and we also need this, and style articles, and we also need articles about lots of different things. And I'm looking at the schedule, and we got like 7 interviews, and we publish twice a week on Tuesdays and Fridays. So, but yeah, I think everyone should subscribe to that because it's fantastic, and that's about it. And then I do a lot of painting, but I don't need to talk about that.
But you are, I'm glad you threw in painting at the very end because it shows that, like most creatives, you have creative drive. You simply just can't sit around and not be creative. And so it's good you're finding several outlets.
Yeah, painting is my main. Painting, I'd almost given up on film after first person. And then I was so bored of dealing with Hollywood, which is different from making movies. I like making movies. I like being on a set and telling people what to do and dealing with actors for the most part. And I love editing my own films. I hate editing other people's films, but I like editing my own a lot. And I started as an editor, and I did editing at USC, and I did editing in camera. I can say feeling pretty confident that I'm a good editor. I don't know about the other things, but on editing, I'm pretty good. However, it's very annoying working in films because you write your script and then it very likely doesn't see the light of day. And writing a script is not satisfying. If you write Casablanca or All About Eve and it doesn't become a movie, I don't think the writer of All About Eve, Mankiewicz, would be pleased with All About Eve. He might be, but I doubt it. It's not satisfying to show people your script and be like, look how great this script is. And they go, yeah, it's a great script. Because no one gives a shit. Because the script is just a blueprint. It's not the end result. However, and I'm not talking about making money from it. I'm just talking about getting it seen. Like, as soon as someone has seen first person, of course, I'd rather it gets released theatrically. It makes lots of money and whatever. But just you seeing first person has served its purpose. The purpose of first person is to be watched. The purpose of the script of first person was to be filmed and then watched. That's the end result. The purpose of a painting is literally just the painting. So if someone sees a painting and they like it, it's done what it's supposed to do. The purpose of a painting isn't to then build a building, So that's the thing. And that's the thing. A script is it's like an architect's blueprint. No one gives a fuck about your blueprint. Either you have a building or you don't have a building. And that's the problem with film. It's so expensive and you deal with so many things. And as it's getting worse and worse as time goes on, that I don't get that much satisfaction out of it. I mean, when it's good, it's nothing better, but it's rare that it's that good. Whereas painting, I enjoy painting just for the purpose of painting. Painting is one of those, be happy in your work type situations. And I can just be happy in my work. I also don't really enjoy writing scripts, and I've kind of stopped doing it unless I'm told to do it. Like, I've got 2 or 3 scripts, and if they get made, then I'll write another one. Until they get made, I can't be bothered to keep writing new scripts, you know. So yeah, I'm writing a clone one. I think that might be my last script until I make a movie, and then I will write another script, because they take a lot of work, and it's frustrating to keep writing something that might never go anywhere.
Yeah, yeah. If you reach a point, there's that youthful exuberance where when you start page one, you believe it'll be made someday. But if you lose that exuberance, it's pretty hard to make yourself go through it. Just like it would be hard to do the blueprint of a building that wouldn't be built. Like why?
Yeah, exactly. And so I write cheap films on the hope that maybe, you know, I never write huge movies because I just don't think those will ever get made. So my films are always, right now I'm writing, except for ironically the 1.5 million one was a huge movie. But short of that, and I think it's still bigger than 1.5 million. But you know, let's be optimistic. But normally I write films that can be made for $1 million, that I can make for $1 million. I don't know if other people could, but you know, I have a certain amount of people that I use, and they're all set in LA or New York, and we use locations, and let's make him for $1 million. I don't want to make him for $500,000 again. And First Person was made for 120,000 all in. So that one was really cheap. I certainly don't want to do that again. I don't even want to do $500,000 again. I want to do $1 million.
Fair enough.
I can work in that world.
Excellent. Well, I think we can wrap it up.
Yeah, I think we can wrap up.
We're up to date. Is there besides what is it, Leo Edit? Is there social media? Is there something someone should use to follow you?
If people have reached this far, they could, I don't know about follow me. I mean, they can find me on Google, but they can, they want to look at my paintings. They can go to cahill.studio or, hold on, let me actually find it. Let me tell you the exact, is it cahill.studio or is it just Cahill Studio? I have to look this up. Give me 1 second here.
No worries. Like you said, if they've made it this far with us, they can listen to us kill little.
Well, the reason I'm surprised is it's normally, I thought it was in my my favorites, and it doesn't seem to be. Okay, here it is. Yeah, cahill.studio. So that's it. www.cahill.studio. And then they can see, it's not up to date. I haven't updated it, but they can see my paintings. There's just it's almost up to date. I've actually only done, it's missing 1, 2, 3, 4 paintings, but they're actually they're probably my 4 best paintings. Well, three of them are my best paintings. The 4th one is part of a series that already exists in here. So yeah, they can see that, and then they can do at Cahill Studio or at cahill.studio on Instagram, and they can follow. It's more up to date there. But
excellent.
Oh, and I do these film review things on my actual Instagram, which are silly, but they're all saved in the highlights, and they can look at that too. That's Mr. Ashley, Mister Ashley. And on that, there's a link to my Cahill Studio. So,
cool, cool. All right, well,
it's all super linked.
In podcast tradition, I'll put Cahill or www.cahill.studio, because Lord knows some people will think there should be a .com at the end, and there isn't.
Yeah,
and,
exactly.
I'll do in the show notes. We'll throw in links.
Okay, great.
And congrats on all that. You know what? I certainly hope to see another film, because as I told you when we were hanging out in 2019, I think First Person for an indie film just nails it. Is just a supremely good film in the indie realm. In fact, whatever. I obviously have a bias towards indie film. I would rather watch someone's personal vision making a film from the right place for the right reasons I have a pretty hard time actually. I rarely enjoy what a Hollywood studio puts out because they really are just making product.
Well, now, definitely.
Yeah, especially now. Every once in a while, I think there's a couple, there's always a filmmaker or two who gets to be or manages to be interesting in spite of the structure around them. But, they're few and far between.
Yeah.
And I wish people were aware that there's so many truly wonderful indie films being made every year. I think one of the horrible things about what's happened during the death of the theatrical presentation system is indie houses are the first to go.
Yes, and I find that there's a hell of a lot of indie movies or smaller movies that I would have gone to see at the ArcLight that I don't bother to watch on streaming because they can be a little heavier or a little cheaper or a little less polished. And I don't necessarily, even though I work in that world, I don't necessarily think I'll have the patience to sit through it on my television. Whereas if I was in the cinema, I would watch it. As opposed to watching a big movie, I can watch that on TV, and it seems to hold up. I always think about that. I always go, like half these films I probably wouldn't have bothered watching if I hadn't seen them in the cinema, and now I don't watch them really.
It's tricky, and streaming is such a different experience. It's very difficult for even me, who loves indie film. I see so many at the festival level. But yeah, when you're looking at a streaming service, there's not a lot of indie content on there anymore anyway. Netflix used to have a ton. Now they've gotten rid of it all. But yeah, I mean, we're more likely to binge a TV series at night if we're just watching TV at the end of the day versus, trying to find a quality indie film. What are the odds that you find a good one? You need a certain level of curation, and I think it's gone.
Yeah.
And whereas the ArcLight, there used to be, and if you're in the LA area, like the Laemmle theaters, they used to give us the best of what was, what would break through on the festival circuit and a couple of good things from overseas. And, I think now even those theaters are showing Marvel films because they got to keep the lights on.
Yeah.
It's tough.
It's tough.
And I'm not going to pretend that doing a podcast where I talk to indie filmmakers helps, but the goal is to make people aware that there's good, like, what can I say? I'll also try to, I'll give myself a little note to look up the Vimeo page for first person so that...
no, for not for first person, for Random Acts of Violence.
Oh, Random Acts of Violence is on Vimeo. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. First person went through it, got distributed traditionally.
Yes. Well, yes and no, but that's another long story.
Yeah. No, I don't want to. Yeah. Clearly, we don't want to pick a scab when we're trying to wrap up.
Yeah. Exactly. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I'll do my my closing spiel, which is thank you everyone for listening. That was Ashley Cahill and I talking for a good while. I think anyone who's a fan of film and indie film would have enjoyed that chat. If you want to learn more about this podcast, just go to discoverindiefilm.com. On social media, it's @DIFwins. If you love short films, we talked a little bit about shorts. There is a Amazon Prime TV series that was born out of the podcast. So if you go to Amazon Prime Video and type in Discover Indie Film, you'll find 6 seasons of the best shorts from the festival circuit. Ashley's film, First Person, a film about love, was at the Sherman Oaks Film Festival. We hold that every November. So if you want to learn more, go to ShermanOaksFF.com, and it's @ShermanOaksFF on social media. And every June, we have a sister festival to the Sherman Oaks Film Festival. That's Film Invasion Los Angeles. You can learn about it if you go to filminvasionla.com, and it's @FilmInvasionLA on social media. Ashley Cahill, good to talk to you. We're going to wrap it up and then record again, and Ashley will get to be as opinionated as he wants to be, answering favorite films, underrated, overrated, and whatnot. So thank you again.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for listening.